look good. He doesn't look good at all.
He must have said something else.
He did, but I can't remember exactly. It doesn't matter. All our animals will have to stay on the farm until he knows what it is. It's a quarantine.
Quarantine?
He told me to tell you to do nothing. There's nothing we can do. So we should just wait to see what the tests will say.
Is that everything? Go through the whole thing again and tell us something else.
No.
He said do nothing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he wants us to do. This is serious. I'm not seriously gonna watch my farm destroy itself and stand here and keep talking about it.
That's all we can do now. It's too late to do anything.
It's never too late. No matter how bad the situation, you can always do something to make it better. You're alive, aren't you?
But what?
I don't know now, but it won't take me long to figure it out. It's times like this when you really see what a character is made of. Remember when Man U bet Bayern Munich? They were 1-0 down the whole game, but they never gave up. And they got that equaliser in extra time, and not happy with that, they went and scored another goal to win the game. That's Alex Ferguson for you!
Soccer is flipping soccer. Who cares?
True, but I'm talking about character. You can't tell what a man's like by describing him. Descriptions are nothing. The only way to see what a man's character is made of is when he responds to a situation. That's when you learn it. And I'm learning a lot about the kind of character you are right now.
I know what we can do. What do you think Grandpa will do?
You do nothing, dummy.
Don't call me dummy. He will do something. Do you remember that time he spent 4 days hammering a spike under the main road with nothing but a sledge? That's because the council wouldn't let him dig it up. 4 days hammering away with his bare hands, and he would have gone on longer if he had to, because he had to do it. Simple as that. Do you actually think he'll give up?
He was lazy too most of the time. How often would you come home from school and he would be asleep on the couch? I remember one evening he comes into the house, the cows were calving, and the mother was stressed out to the nines. And cool as a breeze, he says, "There's a bubble coming out of that cow's arse," and goes on past us and into bed. It's after my mother had to calve the cow herself. A bubble. Can you believe that?
The placenta.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what? He was strong too when he had to be. I remember when I was younger playing in the lawn, you know, at the front with my friend. And I see Grandpa running past us into the house. Then we hear the shouting, and one of the fellas who was working for us comes running out, big fat fella called Magnus. He runs out, and Grandpa runs out after him and starts poking him into the head until he gets away. Magnus was spotted upstairs and money was starting to go missing up there. And Grandpa was about 60 at this stage, and Magnus was a good 30 years younger and 18 stone, but Grandpa was still strong enough to cladder him when he wanted to.
Yeah. He's strong all right, but the wrong kind of strong. Strong men aren't always the best men. Weak men are always better men than strong men. You know the guy I went to school with, Jake Foran?
Yeah.
I'd say you never knew his father. He was in a wheelchair, car accident or whatever. But anyway, he had to raise Jake up on his own. Jake now was the best student in the class, top marks in everything. And he'd never get up to any messing outside school either. He had to do all these jobs for his father before he even started his homework. He had something to do nearly every minute of the day. He's a great success now anyway. But think about it. His father couldn't be weaker. He was handicapped for fuck's sake. But this man, in a wheelchair, had his son more disciplined than any of our fathers could even dream of. Strong men and all that they were. Now, it was no coincidence. Clearly it was because he was handicapped that he was able to exercise such control. Great men are never strong men.
You know, Napoleon was very small.
And Frederick the Great, Frederick the Great ran away from the first battle he ever fought in. Whatever big battle it was, when the fighting broke out, he got nervous and ran away. That was the kind of man he was, a coward, a little coward. But we all know how great a man Frederick the Great turned out to be after that.
You think you're better than Grandpa because you're weaker than Grandpa.
Jacob, we have to get rid of Grandpa. You know what the Liberals said to Bismarck when they finally won a majority parliament? Because you've been in power for so long, none of our best men have been able to gain the experience necessary to lead the country properly. Because of this, we reluctantly think it's best that you continue to lead the country. That's flippin' bullshit. You spend so long listening to one old man that when you get to take over, you can't handle it. We don't want that situation to happen here, now do we?
Do we? What? Grandpa isn't the politician. He should be allowed to stay in charge until he's ready to retire himself.
He won't retire himself. He's getting Alzheimer's, so he definitely won't retire himself.
He's not getting Alzheimer's.
He is. It's in his blood, Jacob. I've been watching him for a while now. His own father died from the same thing. I'm sorry, I've seen it all happen before. It ain't good.
You really are a bullshitter.
What?
Grandpa may be getting old, but he'd never come up with bullshit like that just to get his own way.
I'm telling the truth, Jacob.
But you've got no proof. I hate you, man.
Okay, you're worried about him, fine. But I remember the first time the boss showed signs of Alzheimer's was when he ran his greyhound after he found out she had an injury.
Who?
The boss was Paul's father. Anyway, the boss ran the greyhound, and we were all looking at him going, what the fuck? Only an idiot would run an injured dog. The dog, of course, broke her leg and had to be shot. Paul was livid. I remember him. He kept telling everyone about how, one time, the boss would laugh at all the old men who would run their dogs no matter what. Let them off! You never know! We might win! Paul roared this into his father's face. Now look at you! Doing the same thing! Paul couldn't accept this. But, listen to me, Jacob. Old men will always start to lose their minds and act foolish. That's life, man. Open your eyes. Paul would never have bought those cows 5 years ago.
Why not? Anyone can make a mistake.
You think Alzheimer's isn't serious? I caught the boss one night drinking back a bottle of methylated spirits. Think about that. In the middle of the night, I turned on the light and there was the boss, in his long johns, tipping the bottle into his mouth. I thought God help his shit the next day. But he was grand. Probably cleared him out. He nearly killed himself another night though when he started the tractor and nearly drove it off the cliff. Luckily enough it ran out of petrol 2 feet from the edge. Then he got off and walked home. Not a bother. Can you imagine if it ran out of petrol 6 feet later? He could have smashed that tractor to bits. And that was an expensive tractor. You think it's funny, but that's how people die. Stupidity. Not to mention a man with Alzheimer's. No, no. Another time, I remember seeing him in hospital before he died. His mind was totally gone at this stage. He didn't know where he was, and he didn't know me, and he didn't know anyone. Now that's the loneliest a human can possibly be. And he was looking out the window at children and crying. Crying? I'm serious. He punched Granny once as well. He did a lot of things. You're like your father, I can tell. The way you're acting right now, it's plain as day.
What kind of man is my father? Nobody ever tells me about him.
Well, what do you want to know about him?
Everything?
Everything?
Everything.
Okay. But your father was a complicated man. It might take a while to go through everything.
So what?
Well,
We've not got anything else to do now, do we?
okay. Well, your father had courage. Not like you. I remember once he had to give a speech at this big meeting. I forget what he was saying, but everyone in the room started shouting over him. They were angry at your father for some reason, but your father never shouted. So, when it got too loud for him to speak, he just stood where he was and picked up a newspaper and read it and waited until everyone stopped roaring. Then he started his speech again, cool as a breeze. You're cool, but not like that. I remember we were in the van with the men, and Pa saw some traffic cones on the road and slowed down and told one of us to grab them. I'll be honest, I froze. I was thinking about what Pa would do if a guard caught him, but your father didn't think twice. He was only about this height, but when the van slowed down, he just jumped out, grabbed the cones and jumped back in before Pa sped off. All the men were delighted and patted him on the back and were laughing. But they were right. Your father had courage. Do you think he'd be standing around like you in a situation like this? Once, he arrived in New York with his wife and had only 2 dimes in his pocket. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, he had the number for this composer friend of his. So, your father uses one of his last 2 dimes to ring the number, and the man's wife answers. She didn't know who he was and hung up the phone. Your father tells this to his wife, but his wife says, ring the same number again with the last dime. We have everything to gain and nothing to lose. When he called again, his friend answered, and they had a great night. Another night in the chipper, he tells everyone that he liked to stay up past midnight, so that if he died in his sleep, he'd have lived an extra day. I said, but you haven't lived an extra day. You've only lived an extra 20 minutes or whatever. But no one listened to me. They all agreed with him. Now, I know no one has ever told you how your father died, so I'll tell you now. And you'll understand why no one ever told you. You see, even though I was the oldest, I wasn't your father's actual son. You know that, I suppose. I was adopted when Paul married my mother. So I always knew I'd never get the farm. Yarra, I never minded. So, when I grew up, I left home and I tried to set out on my own. I bought a nightclub up the country, and I did all right out of it. One day, your father must have had a falling out with Paul, because he arrived at my door with his young wife looking for work. I said grand. I was only delighted to have him with me, and he started working in the club. Anyway, to make a long story short, things started to go quiet, and we got into financial trouble. Bad financial trouble. We decided to burn the building down and pay the insurance. Your father said he'd take care of rigging the whole thing up if I took care of the legal side. No bother, your father set the timer to go. So we go for a few drinks. Not many now, just a few. But when your father comes back, he sees his wife isn't there. She never knew about the plan, and she had gone into the nightclub to get some work done while no one would be there to disturb her. Your father gets in the car and rushes after her. When he gets there, the nightclub was already on fire. But your father doesn't think twice. He rushes straight into the flames to save him. He was never seen alive again. Your parents died that night. And to be honest, it was my fault.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It sounds like you did your best.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry though. Your father was a good man. I remember we were at a football match and one of the Cork fans slapped a woman in the face and no one knew what to do. But your father just reaches out his hand and thumps him into the face about 3 or 4 times before the security came and took over. Then, when everyone else was whispering about it, your father just turns around and watches the rest of the match. He was a terror for the films as well. You could call round to his house, and if there was a film on, he wouldn't even look at you until it was over. I remember some lads called round once to give him a hand picking stones. Picking stones! You can imagine now they weren't happy to do it. But he was watching a cowboy, and they had to sit down and watch it until it was over.
Is that everything?
No. I remember we went driving pail post with the boss, and I was sent home because I couldn't hold them. But your father could hold them, no bother. Yeah, you'd have to hold them like this, and the boss would be like that with the sledge. I was shitting it. But the shitting it was only making the boss get angrier. But your father, at 13, not a bother. Go home, I was told. The sledge man could smash your fingers. I thought that anyway. But the thing was, I was getting nervous. But the shouting from the boss was only making me more nervous. Your father wasn't like you or me. That's what I'm trying to say. You know those ones along the top of the hill? Yeah, that was him. He was younger then than you are now, and he still wasn't scared to do the right thing. I'm telling you, Jacob, do the right thing.